I'm extremely excited to introduce Professor Nader Tavassoli, who will be welcoming and moderating our second panel on fan engagement. Professor Tavassoli is a marketing professor here at London Business School. He's also the non-executive chairman of the Brand Inside. And for the past 20 years, Nader has coached, consulted, and taught executives ranging from high-tech startups all the way to global Fortune 500 companies. So we'd like to jump right into it. So Professor Tavassoli, take it away. Thank you.
All right, well, thanks for coming back after the break. My brain is full. It was an incredible panel, and I really think it set the stage for this panel as well. It's it's also an interesting week to be having this panel, as we heard the great Sir Alex has retired, and one of the lines that really stuck with me that I kept on reading in the press is he didn't just go about building a team; he built about building a club. And if you think about it in the commercial world, we're not just there to develop products and services, we're there to develop brands. And I think Manchester United has achieved that with flying colours. And so that's, in some sense, the backdrop to this panel in terms of building a brand. And how does one go about that? And I think one of the focal points will be really this issue of deep customer insight. And what we heard in the panel before, which is really a theme in this sort of cross-border fan engagement, we really have to understand what it means to be a fan and what we are competing for. We're competing for leisure time, the leisure dollar, which is very, very different than other kind of expenses. And so that means you're also competing against very, very different industries, not just different sports. And we heard that loud and clear in the panel before. But we also heard that, expanding internationally, these fans have a very different relationship to the sport and also to the club. I myself grew up in Hamburg, Germany. So that's my team, and that's the team I've been crying with for the last 20 years since I left Hamburg. But I've also adopted Arsenal, which is now a true Arsenal fan can't understand it. I mean, how can you follow two teams? That doesn't exist, right? I mean, that's not the kind of relationship you can have. So there's different layers of relationships you have to the sport and to the team, and the challenge here is how do you build those relationships, and then how do you monetize them as well in order to help build the club and to reinvest in the club. And what I heard from Tom Fox was fantastic because at least on one metric, Arsenal is beating Manchester United, because Manchester United, if you look at their prospectus when they went public in the fall, they claimed that 680 million fans worldwide. Now Arsenal, I heard, only has 450 million, but Manchester United makes 400 million, so that's only about 2/3, right? About 65 pence per pound per fan. That's all they make. Arsenal makes a whooping 75 pence per fan per year, right? But if you think about that relationship, it's incredible, right? This passion for these teams and people saying I'm a fan, yet you're only making that small kind of amount. So my tip to Tom was, have a fundraising campaign, fan-based, £1 per fan, and buy Messi. And that's the challenge. But these gentlemen are going to introduce themselves. I think the format worked particularly well from the panel before, about 5 minutes each. They'll introduce themselves, a bit of background, if you will, because they're coming out from different perspectives, from a brand, from a sales perspective, from a data perspective. If we will just maybe go in order that you're seated, and then we'll invite questions as well. So we'll start with Joel, then Antony, Matt, and Richard after that.
Cool, thank you. Hello everyone, I'm Joel Seymour-Hyde. I'm the Vice President of Strategy for Octagon across UK, Europe, Middle East and India. So I hopefully bring a bit of a global perspective to this evening. Octagon is one of the largest consultancies to brands in the world in sports sponsorship. So our job is very much on the brand side. We advise brands on the acquisition of sponsorship rights and then the activation of those rights. So to talk about cross-border engagement with fans, I'll take it from the brand angle in terms of what does it mean for brands to be cross-border, why is the globalization of sports so interesting for brands, and what are the key trends that are happening there. I think the first thing to say is that we've seen media proliferation, everyone has talked about it, has changed the dynamic in terms of the importance that sponsorship has played in the marketing mix for brands. So now many brands are using sponsorship as not as a nice add-on to their marketing strategy, but a fundamental part of what they're doing. If they're trying to drive awareness in a new market quickly, if they're trying to build engagement, it's one of the key ways they will use their marketing money to do so. I think we see in soccer that's a huge example. So Manchester United are, no offence to the Arsenal fans in the room, but they are probably still the benchmark on using the brand of Manchester United to drive commercial revenue globally. So if you look at their last 3 shirt sponsorship deals, Aon, AIG, Aon, and now Chevrolet, none of those brands particularly had an interest in the UK as a sponsorship market or as a consumer market, but they've used the Manchester United brand around the world to grow their own platforms. I mean, we work with AIG. They've had some bumps over the last few years, I'm sure you're aware, but they actually got incredible success out of the Manchester United sponsorship. Then when they had their bump, they had to relinquish. Aon jumped straight in, and now AIG are back sponsoring the All Blacks, and I hope you don't mind about that deal. But yeah, we'll talk about that later. Yeah, but it's been again incredibly successful for them, and a really great platform for them to relaunch their brand on a global basis. So what we are seeing as a challenge, I think, through cross-border is a differentiation between what we call elite sponsorship rights and smaller local rights. So there is a challenge, I think, with these big properties like Manchester United, the World Cups, the Olympics. They are driving huge increases in sponsorship revenues every single time it moves around the world. But even if you look at the UK post-London 2012, huge success for each NGB on a medals basis, but no real success commercially afterwards in the local market. So judo, badminton, hockey, those guys are not getting in big sponsorship deals. And that comes on to the next point really, which is about acquisition. And huge global brands now are buying global sponsorship properties because they offer efficiencies. So they allow you to buy access to fan groups around the world and then adapt your leverage campaigns based on where you are in the world. So you can acquire rights to the World Cup, and then you can activate that in many markets around the world, and our job will be to be in those markets with those brands and do that for them. So that leads on to the next point, which is if you are acquiring a global property because there are efficiencies and it allows you to reach your consumers all around the world, then can you just do the same activation in 20, 30, 40 different markets? And the answer on most cases, or certainly for a good sponsorship activation, is absolutely not. So we're seeing now much more tailored, integrated activations and marketing programs operating in different markets. So if you are, football is an easy example to pick because everyone knows about football, but if you are activating football in Western Europe, it's a very mature market, you're going to focus very much on the team and promoting association of the team. If you go to Southeast Asia, for example, you may look much more towards individual iconic players as your platform to activate, because actually there's a relative fickleness to that fan support. So these stats we hear United in every sales deck they present, every year the number goes up, how many fans they have. But fan is a very loose term. It's about, they've had a like on Facebook, or they've had one positive conversation. They're not, how engaged they are as fans is a big question. So if Cristiano Ronaldo moves to Real Madrid, he takes a lot of fans with him. So in those markets, you're going to channel your activation in a very different way in how you do things. And then if you move over to Australia or the US, where football's a much more of a participation sport, again, you'll think about your activation being different there. Not really about an iconic player who no one's heard of, but thinking about how you can use grassroots sport. Football's a grassroots platform to do the same job. So it's an incredibly interesting time to be in the industry, and the cross-border and the globalization of sport offers huge amounts of opportunities, but it also presents challenges both in terms of how you're going to activate, and I think for smaller rights holders in terms of how they can grow their commercial business when you've got huge brands spending big money on big properties but maybe neglecting some of the small properties. So that'd be a quick overview to start.
Okay, thank you. So complexity, not just on the fan base, but also on the customer side, on the other side. How do you link those more fragmented audiences on both sides? Antony.
Okay, my name's Antony Marcou. I'm Group Managing Director of Sports Revolution. Just to kind of build on some of the themes that were built out, that were coming out the first panel that we can kind of build on for here. Globalization and social media are two phenomena that are happening simultaneously, and the genie can't be put out of the bottle, can't be put back in the bottle. So if you think about how social is driving how rights holders monetize fans, how fans themselves are engaging with given sports, and you set that in the context of the entertainment business, then you got something quite interesting going on. I think I might have been the only person that was at the Euro basketball game on Sunday night, but a fantastic experience. I'm not a basketball fan, but going there, I was engaged, I was entertained, I was asked my opinion, and the whole thing worked really well. Let me just touch upon, as an example, how social media, and I'll use the example of football as well, is changing how people interact with their sport. You've got fans in Asia tweeting about what's happening. If you take Alex Ferguson's retirement, 6,000 tweets per second globally. Just think about that for a second. 6,000 tweets per second. So people aren't being asked their opinion, they're volunteering and they're engaging around a given subject. And if we take some of the things that Tom was talking about in terms of actually the model having to change and looking at how fans engage with their club, I would say unfortunately, I'm a Tottenham Hotspur fan, but we have a situation where movement has emerged on social media. If any of you urge you to do it, I'd look at the hashtag 1882, all built around the resistance to the modern game. They want to stand, they want to sing at football. And clubs that fail to do that and have failed to engage social and go, and Alex Ferguson's a good example, Man United don't engage Twitter. They think they're bigger than the social sphere, and that's a decision they've made. But on that 1882 movement, they decided just to turn up at under 21s games. So 1,500 people turn up at Barnet on a Monday night to watch Spurs versus Arsenal under 21 game. Those people meet in pubs, they're spending beer, they're buying t-shirts, they're buying fanzines, and that is money, quite bluntly, that is leaking from the game. And they're doing that because a club and a federation is arrogantly assuming they can't engage with those consumers. Well, if you don't consume with them and don't engage with them, they're going to decide to do it themselves. So that's not going away, that's going to happen. And I look at Gary Neville and what he's doing now around the Manchester United Supporters Association. He's going to do and understand the latent value of that club, build his social platform around that, build his brand, and there'll be revenue being sucked in. So there's some things for us to think about. The other thing I want to just add on is in a setting in academia, and I say this without any hint of irony, the talent pool currently, in my opinion, within sport is not as high as it should be. We recruit from traditional areas, and I take the point that Rick said. For a number of years ago, it was an ex-player who's then emerged into a commercial role, and before we know it, he's running the football club. I'm not trying to exaggerate to make a point. We're going to have to start recruiting from a different talent pool, right? If you look at the advertising industry, and I was trying to build on the point that Brett, they realised probably about 15 years ago that making 60-second commercials is dead, right? There's no Ridley Scott ads being made anymore because actually we're consuming second screen, third screen, and different ways. The sports industry is going to have to realise we're going to have to start, and commercial rights holders, that we're going to have to change our conventional rights model, selling rights, and understanding recruiting people from social, people that might have worked at Twitter, the emergence of an Apple TV, and convergence of conventional media is going to dominate. If you're going to do a TV rights deal, which is going to be a pull model from Apple TV, you're going to have to know something about how Apple TV works, how socially engaged and how you engage it. Currently, I don't think we recruit from that sphere. So for you guys, I think the future's definitely bright because you don't come with the same preconceptions as we do, and you're younger and you consume social. You get it. You've been brought up on that generation. So that's my 2 pence worth.
Thank you.
Okay. Good evening. I'm a Chelsea fan, and I'm still here. My name is Matt Rogan. I'm MD of Two Circles. We've been in existence for just under 2 years as a business, and our premise is to help sporting organisations, whether that be clubs or federations or governing bodies, synthesise and understand the customer data and the other data sources that they hold in their organisation, and use that to their own commercial advantage, whether commercial advantage, if you're a governing body, means driving participation and understanding why certain areas of your customer base are lapsing, whether commercial advantage means understanding what the ideal architecture for a membership strategy might be and launching that, whether commercial advantage means trying to understand demographically what the most sensible sales strategy is for Sri Lanka, West Indies on a Wednesday in Cardiff in the Champions Trophy this summer. That's the world that we play in. We've grown from 3 people in September 2011 to 24 today, which probably gives you a bit of a sense, to echo Antony's point, around how the world is changing. We don't hire from sport, pretty much. So the people who are here today from our organisation, we've got from dunnhumby, Tesco's loyalty card business. We got from Accenture. We got 2 engineers who've been responsible for developing the new standards for cricket helmets using their engineering backgrounds to understand what actually what velocity and what protection is needed when you're bowling quick. So we don't hire from a traditional talent pool, but we are interested in becoming somewhere like this, which says something. I guess to Antony's point, yes, I agree around the social point. Yes, I agree around understanding the future of technology, which is why we know these 2 gents pretty well. Fundamentally, though, I guess it comes from a standpoint of saying, well, all that stuff is all well and good, but it actually, Tom said it earlier on, right insight, right message, right customer, right time, and reacting to the feedback that they consciously or subconsciously give you against that. So, yes, all of these front-end marketing techniques are useful and beneficial. We see ourselves and often find ourselves working next to the customers, clients that we're working with, almost without wanting to use the NFL analogy, but we use it a lot in our business as the quarterback. So we're calling the play based on the data that we see, and then expertise like this is making the play happen. What we tend to find is that creates some uncomfortable truth, actually, in terms of either domestic or international fan engagement. So the Champions Trophy example I gave you earlier on, it sure as hell creates a challenge to traditional PR spend when you start actually understanding which demographic is going to buy and which time and why for an event this summer. There's an awful lot of wasted money going out there. I guess from an international perspective, we know each other from many places, but in particular, somewhere like a rugby club, right? And actually, what is an international fan in a rugby club environment? Is an international fan a British expat living in Hong Kong who happens to be a fan of Harlequins? Or is it somebody from Hong Kong living in London who happens to live 2 miles from the Stoop? And actually, I think the world of data and the world of digital is starting to break some of that stuff down, actually. So on one level, I challenge the whole premise of cross-border fan engagement, because actually, what's the border?
The border? No, I don't know. I'm Richard Ayers, and I'm not a fan. I feel like that was an AA meeting thing. I'm Richard Ayers, and I'm not a fan. I wasn't brought up on football, so I didn't particularly follow it. Brought up on cricket and rugby instead. And so when I went to work at Manchester City a couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago, as an external consultant who knew nothing about the football environment, it was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Partly because my instinctive reaction was, so you charge these guys a lot of money for a season ticket, and then you flog them a new shirt every year, and as far as I could tell, that was it. Right? You give them sod all else during the rest of it, and yet they pour love on the club. Incredible sort of intensity of emotional devotion. And really, that formed the basis of. So the last couple of years, Man City's done an awful lot of digital stuff and an awful lot of fan engagement, and it came from that moment of realizing that really all you had to do was give access. Give access, just facilitate the love that all these fans had anyway. You were feeding this intensity of emotion, and the more you could do, so all the behind-the-scenes stuff that we did, that was about building that fan base. Now, if I fast forward a couple of years, you get into we'd be doing a whole bunch of work with MLS in the States. Totally different, kind of fascinating, because you've got, on the one hand, you take Houston Dynamo, has a hardcore fan base of what they call supporters, but the guys who are fully standing up and chanting and singing throughout the whole entire thing. Only 500 of them. And then you get this big gap of sort of where in the UK and England you would have this kind of gradation of people who were sort of hardcore fans, or sort of hardcore, all the way down through the, yeah, well, I sort of support them because I grew up on, down to people who don't really give a damn. Right? In the States, you get this hardcore, small numbers, and then you get a big gap, and then you get a lot of people who quite like going to sport and will happily go, or their kids play it and they're soccer moms, or that kind of thing. So they've got a weird dynamic to be able to deal with. And that's in Houston. You go up a few hundred miles and you get to Portland or Seattle, incredible fan base. Portland has a 25,000 seater stadium and it's full all the time, and they absolutely there. Some of the Vancouver Whitecaps fans went to because it's part of the experience in the States is about the intensity that you don't generally get in baseball, NFL, basketball, because of the breaks in the game. So they sell it on the intensity that you get. And some of the Vancouver Whitecaps fans actually got turfed out of an NHL, a hockey game, because they wouldn't sit down and shut up. They were just stood there chanting throughout and chanting and singing songs. And they got asked to leave by the stewards because isn't what you do at that particular type of game. So you get this kind of weird sort of dynamic going on there. The one thing I'd pick up from the previous panel that I would disagree with Tom in particular on was he said at one stage, the number of them mentioned how digital was an incredibly powerful force and new technologies, and Rick was mentioning smart TVs and broadband expansion, all of which is very true, and all of which, I used to run the portal for Tiscali, one of the big ISPs in Europe. So I'm, that broad content to sell broadband world is done a lot of that. But Rick said if you want to break into a new market, you need to be using TV, because that's where you get mass audience. You test your audience, you test your commercials. And actually, I would say you use digital as your recon unit. Right? You send in digital first, because that's the way you can tell so much about an audience and the fan base, and you can interact and you can engage. And in fact, some of the stuff we've been doing more recently with City is we've been building the content selection. So take the Middle Eastern, the Arabic service that is done. The live match Twitter is done by a bloke who we've known has been a fan for 3 or 4 years, because he's been an active tweeter back in 2 or 4 of the club. And we got to a stage where we went, do you know what? This guy is perfectly sensible, normal, he's actually a good, knowledgeable football fan, and he will tweet for us in Arabic live every game. So you end up being the first EPL team that's doing live Arabic tweeting from a match. And that's really easy, and by the way, doesn't cost us anything. And then you get fan-created material, which, if filtered correctly, if curated in the right way, gives you this incredible bond with the local audience. It's contextually, culturally relevant, which is really important. Final point. Something I had to do at City because we didn't have any video rights. So when faced with that question of how are you going to build an international audience? And by the way, you can't use any of the footage from stuff that actually goes on the pitch. It's a tough challenge. But the way I took it was down the line of the data, the performance data from being on the pitch. Because I think digital has a really big advantage over broadcast. Having come from a broadcast world, broadcast has to hit one audience. When you're a program maker, you have to think that there is an audience at the other end of this who you're going to receive. And you know there might be a range of people, but editorial tone, when you're writing your script, when all you're doing that stuff, you have to pick it. You have to pick one audience, because what you don't want to be doing is you've got to try not to patronise one lot and try not to sort of go over the heads of the others. You've got to sort of try and balance it right. Digital, the audience can self-select. And one of the key challenges you've got when you're trying to grow an international audience is there's this sort of, these two axes of fan love and fan knowledge. And fan knowledge might be, you can get a guy in Indianapolis who's a Man City fan, who was born and brought up in Indianapolis, who's obsessed and therefore knows everything about the club and about football. Or you can get somebody in the UK who's like me, who's kind of vaguely a floating voter who quite happily go to a game, frankly knows fuck all about football. I'm happy to be educated though. And then somewhere in there you can start targeting the right kind of audiences. So what we did with data, I coined this rather idiotic term, datatainment, but we found the sports data, and we can find ways of turning that into explorable media that has almost a kind of games feel about it, like a sort of FIFA 13, Football Manager, maybe some arcade games kind of cross thing, where you're using that data to be able to give people an experience of the sport and an understanding of the sport at their level, so they can then fall in love with it. That's probably enough for me.
Thank you. So lots of different perspectives on this issue of brand, deep customer insight, and particularly one point, it's not just enough to understand separate customers, targeting them separately. We've got to be careful what happens across customer groups, because as you said, the core is kind of it fuels this fan-based engagement that you're trying to drive, which is at the core of the brand or the club. We'll take questions from the audience.
Richard Gillis from the Wall Street Journal. I've just got this question about as fans get further away. So if you're a club, and if you're Arsenal or Manchester United, how promiscuous are those clubs in other territories? And I'm just wondering, in terms of, we take for granted that there's a loyalty there, but actually, quite often they're following winners and they're following stars. And I'm just wondering about the club loyalty bit, and it's probably a question I should have asked Tom earlier, but he talked about, he used a great word, belonging, which is one of those great marketing words, but I'm just wondering how that looks if you're talking to someone in India, in China. The top line sounds fantastic, but I'm just wondering, below that, what it looks like.
I think we're at year zero in this world. I grew up supporting and falling in love with football at a certain age, born out of my local community. That was the team I'd done. But in a globalised world, when we're on Premier League footballs around the world, the reality is they're just not going to have that same level of engagement. But we're at year zero, so you reach out to them and then you build that loyalty. You go and speak to them, and one of the points I think is quite interesting about the Arsenal shops, and it's nothing to do with being a Spurs fan, but generally closing down, it seems obvious, but to go and build bricks and mortar and to build loyalty that way and get them to buy shirts and build the Man United model of building bars that no one goes to in Asia, it seems quite common sense, because actually they actually support 19 other teams as well. But you go out there and you reward them. So your Arabic example, you go out there and you find a guy in Indonesia or a girl in Indonesia that's got 30,000 followers and they're passionate about Man City. Well, you're either in the tent pissing out or you're out the tent pissing in, and you build loyalty by giving them stuff. So come and meet. Until yesterday, Mancini. Come and sit on the bench. Come and have a chat. We're going to give you tickets. We're going to give you some behind the scenes. That builds loyalty, and they're your biggest advocates. That's far more cost effective because it's free than building shops. Now the loyalty thing, the reality is that's going to take time, and the game is global. We've all got to accept, and not just in football, but in basketball, in rugby, that actually you're going to have to give up part of the prices. We have to give up some of that if you want global revenues and you want global fan base. But the reality is, of course, you're not going to be as loyal as a guy from Crouch End who supported Spurs all his life. That's me.
I just wonder if it's the same. If it's sort of loyalty looks like product loyalty. So we're loyal to brands, and whether it's the same relationship as that. Sport plays very heavily on passion and relationship. I'm just wondering, because Octagon come out with their passion driving thing, and that says that it's all about stars and in faraway places.
Yeah, I think you've got to be realistic. It's fickle. So, of course, there are dedicated fans all around the world of a team, but nevertheless, why do Manchester United have more fans than anyone else? They've won 13 out of 22 Premier League seasons. So, success on the pitch will certainly drive popularity of it and that loyalty, and you can use that as a platform to build in those markets. But there will always be floating fans. I lived in India for a year working on the IPL, and it was interesting to live there, see the IPL, and also watch live football, because Premier League was actually, and Rick made the point about the increase in Premier League rights in India. It is very, very big, but I would say to locals, so who's your team? And they'll say Manchester United. But I do like Arsenal as well, and Chelsea are very good, and that's fine, And I think from a commercial perspective, there's no problem with that at all. There's no rule that says, but if you're 1,000 miles away from where a team is, you have to only have one team you enjoy to watch. The commercial point is that if you're selling your brand, as this Tom said, doesn't like using the word brand for a football club, but if you're selling it to sponsors, then that's what it is. If you're selling your commercial reach around the world, then it doesn't really matter if that fan isn't that loyal, as long as they are engaged with you at that time. Even 5 years' time, the model moves a bit, it's okay, you've still sold your property to a brand who's looking for global reach. So you just got to be realistic about what a fan means.
I think
mean the same thing.
There are 3 points I'd make of that. One is promiscuity I think is fine. I think we're biased to it, and we need to be really careful about our bias in the UK, we live in an incredibly intensely football-dominated media landscape, social landscape. You know, you are at some stages in your life as a London male treated as a pariah because you don't have a football team, which is just weird, really. But you know, we don't treat that as weird. We go, oh, that's perfectly normal. Of course, you should have a team. And I get branded as, oh, well, you must be an Arsenal fan because you live in Highbury. I'm like, and kind of emotionally, sort of, yeah. But, you know. So I don't think there's a problem with promiscuity. And yeah, you're absolutely right. You get a lot of people say, but it's almost like backing horses. There's a sense of, well, I fancy United in the league, but City in the cup, and so in Europe, and that's okay because I'm following individual brands. So that brand loyalty thing, I think, is weird. I can also, not surprisingly, I mean, Facebook fan likes, right, the lowest form of human commitment there is. but you know, even as a vague measure, there are. If Tom was still here, there are 1.4 million people who like Tom's Arsenal page, who also like the Man City page. Right, so what? You know. You gonna say something?
No, only that I think that the analogy of promiscuity is interesting and potentially quite dangerous. There comes a point where you stop becoming promiscuous, allegedly, when you get married. And for me, as a
Allegedly.
as a 5-year-old, the moment where my allegiance was cemented was when my dad gave me a Chelsea shirt and said, "Sorry, son, I know they just got relegated, but you're a Chelsea fan." And I just wonder, in 20 years' time, if we never get to the stage internationally where that bond is so strong for the person who's on Manchester United's webpage and an international member right now, who hands a shirt to his son and says, "I bought this in the market, that's your club." I don't know.
The core issue actually comes back to something Alistair said earlier on. In media world, we would call it the attention economy. Is the issue? That's really the issue. I'm not actually so worried. A lot of the football clubs, frankly, any of the sports clubs, they get incredibly focused on the other people in their league, and I always kind of think, why that? That's not an issue, right? The issue is the cinema, the TV, the this, the that, the whatever, all the other brands who are cramming their space. I mean, the nature of the digital explosion of services and proliferation of devices and time, whatever, is that they're getting a billion things thrown at them every second, and how the hell are you going to take 30 seconds of it? That's the real challenge.
Yeah, totally agree.
Take another question over here. Yeah.
I am Killian McMahon, MBA this year, and Liverpool fan for my sins.
It's not a confessional. It's all right. It's all right.
With all this data around branding and advertising, do you see, or is it coming, a day where we link players' wages to their brand and what revenue they're driving, so that they pay for themselves?
Why don't they do performance-related pay?
Do I see a day? Perhaps already.
You know, going to Madrid was clearly
I'm 39 and like used to play right midfield. Paris Saint-Germain didn't offer me 30 million quid for a season.
Yeah.
And it's also how you segment your deals as well. So, you know, with players now, a lot of them, there's a big debate, clubs versus players, and who owns their image rights. So that's the easiest way to take that data in terms of brand and start to monetize it in a clear way. So players in their contracts will say now, okay, my salary is X, but I keep my image rights because they're worth more to me, or conversely they won't. And that's one way. And you know, football's had a long history of performance-related pay, so there's no reason with a particularly unscrupulous or /savvy agent you could develop interesting opportunities there to negotiate on salary costs versus commercial benefits.
I mean, as a fan, I think it's horrendous, but but the reality is it's here. And then if you look across the pond, and the what is now becoming the annual NBA walkout, we're going to collectively bargain in old-fashioned trade union style. That's it, living and breathing. They're going, we're going to down tools until we get the right deal, which is interesting when you think about financial fair play. You think about the point that Rick was making earlier on about salaries getting out of control. We're just giving it straight to the players. That is democratisation. That is their living and breathing. It's happening in front of our eyes. Now, is it good for the sport? Is it good for the game? I'll let you decide. But it's where does it end? Because put yourself in. We used the phrase earlier on, fan engagement. Put yourself as, should we call them customers for a second? Sport is becoming expensive because the talent is drawing, as in the talent on the pitch, on the court. is taking the money out of the game. And I come back to it again. Only in the mid 80s I could go along as a 15-year-old kid. I could pay £2. I could stand behind the goal, notwithstanding it was a horrendous environment, but I could do that. Now as a 15-year-old kid, with your allowance, Saturday shop money, whatever it is you're doing, the other challenges in your time, going out to a nightclub, going to a concert, that worries me, because the feeling of the game, they've got more alternatives, and that's the worry. And also when the experience becomes better via second screen in your living room, which it is starting to be, and certain sports are doing that, than in the arena itself, then you've got problems. And that's not a football, not an EPL. That's a general sports issue. They're going to have to address that whole dynamic.
The data related stuff. I was developing a bunch of data products with Man City, and I don't know if you saw the RFU's IBM Tri Tracker that we did during the Six Nations. So that was my baby. And even with those ones, we butted up against internal politics, in particular the sports science department, who were concerned about player performance data becoming too transparent, so that it would affect the player's value in the stock market effectively, the player's psyche, and also it being competitive advantage to other teams. And as a media perspective, I thought that's ridiculous. We can find ways around this. If we can use financial data from the stock market and make it public, we can find ways of fuzzying it, delaying it, changing it, giving averages, whatever it is. But there is a very serious concern about player performance data being something that you need to be very careful about. Never mind the fact that some of the work I've been doing with Harlequins, actually the GPS tracking data that they get falls under the player's medical data, and therefore actually it's a player's personal IP issue that you have to do with the RPA and get that negotiated as well. It's not club data anyway.
Back in. You sort of touched on this in the previous answer, but was wondering, as teams and leagues get better at the fan engagement, the digital explosion behind the fan engagement, to what extent does all of that then cannibalize the in-stadium experience and ticket sales and whatnot? And I guess the context behind that is the NFL. In America, a lot of teams are experiencing, your two screens, you have your tablet, you can play fantasy football, so that the ticket drive and the push to go in stadium is a little bit less. So to what extent are teams maybe bringing some of that digital explosion in stadium to better the experience there?
That's your territory, right?
I mean,
any of us, but
I mean, the reality is, and I'm going to state the obvious, and fun enough, City had started to do it. There's other clubs rolling out. Unless you put connectivity in sports arena, and we might hark back to the great old days when it was beer on the floor and people were gone. We have to engage them on their level, and if you can't upload, download, tweet, engage, text your friends because there's no Wi-Fi infrastructure, forget it. We're going to have empty stadiums in multiple sports, and that's just consumerism out there, smacking us in the face. Again, that's just the world we live in, because you can get a better experience at home. I was in the Barclays Centre 5 weeks ago, and I don't want to say the game, but I was shocked at how many people were not in the stadium, as in the seat, but supping Bud Lights in the thing, engaging. Now, how do you address that? Well, if there's 5 games a week and you can watch different games at the same stadium, you're going to get promiscuity. But a starting point is actually giving them what they want in their seat around an infrastructure.
And then the premise becomes, okay, well, fundamentally, how do people get access to that? Well, they probably have to provide some data. The question then becomes, well, how do you use that data to improve the experience in the stadium for that 2, 3, 4 hours, whatever it is? But then, what do you do for, if you're the NFL, you've got 8 home games a year, what do you do in the rest of the time with that data to actually make it a year-round relationship as opposed to 8 quick hits? So, opportunity for engagement, challenge perhaps for a couple of hours, but only if you don't have good marketing.
There's a lot of fear in the industry. I mean, is this fair to say? There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear in the industry. A lot of people kind of going, "Oh my God, they're going to stop coming to our stadiums," or just saying, and what a surprise! It's usually gentlemen of a certain age and a certain cultural background who don't really use any second screen devices anyway, saying, "Oh, but we don't want people distracting from the value of our game," and it's all ridiculous, right? And give it 5 years, we won't even be having the debate. And so progress goes on. But I mean, I went to the Arsenal Wigan game last night, and as I always do, I kept an eye on who's using what screens and who's tweeting and whatever. Actually, really, really low levels. Almost nobody, because they were locked on what was a really important and exciting game. But literally half-time whistle went. Hundreds, thousands of people in the pocket took out a phone, and of course, all going, "Oh fucking hell, I can't get a network." But that was the moment where they could have been sharing the experience and communicating, and from the club's point of view, marketing and ordering and buying the next, all that sort of stuff. They kept pushing the memberships just open, go to this URL message on the thing, and yet nobody in the stadium, even those probably 30,000 people who reached for their phone, not one of them had a message on their device.
I mean, I'd pay for that as a fan. So how many miles did someone run in that half?
Yep.
Actually, because that is the data theory is enhancing your experience. Because the guy behind you saying, "Well, he's rubbish," and well, actually, is he? I'm just looking at this here. He made the assist, and actually, that adds to the experience. Just one thing I want to add about your point about data and a force for good. So if you look at pro cycling and you look at the Garmin team, they make Garmin cycle computers, right? You can see what Ryder Hagedal is doing, his stats, and what is happening. Now that is actually is a way of using data and consuming it and engaging with the sport is a gold standard. And by the way, it's probably more effective in combating drugs cheating than anything else, because you're looking at the wattage and going, it is unsustainable for someone to do that long. And as that data becomes available, that is a force good. But it's how you use it, how you merchandise it.
I mean, I worked for MTV for 5 years, through sort of early noughties, and effectively was at MTV as iTunes came out. Let me tell you, in any industry that I've been involved in, standing in the way of what technology enables you to do is rarely, and believing that your product is sacrosanct is rarely a good idea.
I'd also just add that from a stadium experience versus the TV versus stadium, the two are intrinsically linked. If you don't have a great stadium experience and you have empty seats, you can't sell your product to TV, and then it's a vicious cycle. So, again, one of the reasons the Premier League was so successful was it was a great product to sell abroad, because there was atmosphere, there was noise, there was crowds, and that made it compelling for people to watch on TV. So you have to get both right, and if people are demanding for technology to enhance their experience at the stadium, if you don't give that to them, they'll walk away, and then your TV product suffers anyway. So they're all together.
And obviously you can monetize it as well, right?
Sell it to a sponsor.
Well, you can sponsor the stats. The Energizer Buddy can sponsor the miles run.
That's easy.
And so, in the back.
So, kind of feel sorry for all the other sports when we talk tonight about the major American sports, the major European sports. From your perspective as marketers and big data, I was just thinking about then the only one real success I think in the last sort of decade would be the Indian Premier League that's absolutely come out and crushed cricket professionally and built a big brand. What's coming next? What's going to come and compete against all these other sports that have got so much momentum, so much money that they can build this global brand? Is there other sports going to be able to compete, or are they slowly going to die?
Tough Mudder. Does everybody know Tough Mudder?
Yeah.
In endurance sport, in terms of participation, you're the participation expert, right? Participation sports are the thing that are growing like crazy, and Tough Mudder is, an amazing business.
And fundamentally, they really implicitly understand customer engagement and customer experience in a way that professional sport has yet to grasp. Some of the work that we're involved in together comes from a position of, right, who is our customer base, where do they cross over, what do they do, how do we compete with the Everyman Cinema membership offer that's also happening and out and about in the area in which we're offering a proposition, and given that, what do we create from scratch that's going to be compelling to a high net worth audience that we know this prospective sponsor is interested in? Because the benefit they've got is every day they wake up in the morning, they've got a blank sheet of paper. So it's sports that have the agility to start from scratch and work out what the proposition is that works for customer and sponsor, as opposed to operating in a legacy world of this is what our product looks like.
If you think about cricket, it's probably the most traditional sport available, and they were still able, in the UK where it started, to innovate that sport in such a way that it's completely reinvented itself, created a new form of the game, driven $1 billion TV deals in India, and that's a very traditional sport which is only played in the Commonwealth. So if they can reinvent themselves in that way, then there's no reason participation sports, swimming, cycling, things of a huge base of interest, could not be innovative and think of ways to solve problems they have. So
I mean, it's all connected to what you're saying. If you accept there's a global universe of viewers, and everywhere's got a niche. If you just take your old world of broadcasting, yes, you know, BBC One, ITV traditionally drove viewing, but you've got 900 odd channels on the EPG. Everyone finds their niche. If you take that on a global base, where effectively we're all going to be consuming it off a web platform on TV, we can go in and pull down what we want at any point in time. Everywhere's got a chance. And again, I'm slightly biased. I think the pro cycling case is so compelling of how they carved out a niche. They used data, they built a brand, and Sky, as a brand, not as a broadcast platform, pushed and created that. That gives hope for anyone. Again, just my experience on Sunday night, I thought basketball as a consumer was a fantastic experience. And I kind of thought, you know what, I'll take my family here. This is quite a good place to be. And I think when you've got a global canvas and everyone can participate, everyone will find the niche. And you know, again, that's everyone's selling their sport.
I think it's just a more even playing field now, arguably. You know, I went to see a band at Shepherd's Bush Empire 3 weeks ago that I discovered on YouTube, don't have a record label, distribute their content on iTunes, have absolutely zero cost base, and are now selling out 2 nights at Shepherd's Bush Empire, and they're American. Right? So don't tell me triathlon can't create a viable economic model. Don't tell me modern pentathlon can't create a viable economic model. But it comes from understanding where's our customer base, where are they distributed, what's the method of content distribution. Because if we believe Rick and the Premier League are going to be retailing direct, not long, it's not going to start with the Premier League. It's going to start with bright people, the same bright people probably who are managing that band.
Another question? If I may I ask a question to the panel. I mean, what's interesting here is thinking about the role of data. You know, we've heard that data enhances the experience. It adds to the experience in some sense, with statistics, for example. It certainly is there for commercial success, where we can understand the customers, offer them different things, convert them into revenue. One thing we haven't mentioned is the whole trend in how it enhances team performance, Moneyball, where there's been a real revolution. My question to the panel is, you're sitting between the clubs and the fans. When I think about the history of the club card at Tesco and how many companies are trying to emulate that success, there's a huge cultural gap inside the sports organizations, because it's really a culture change.
Yeah.
What's your experience, what's your view on that in terms of getting clubs to adopt this, you know, any one of these 3 ways in order to change their behavior?
I think I talked about the fact that we look for academics and analytics when we recruit. There's a third pillar to that, which is emotional intelligence. My background is I ran a leadership development business before I set 2 circles up, and fundamentally we're creating something different here, and the first reaction is denial and resistance and insecurity. A lot of the time, you all know, different when we're landing it in clients. So the way in which you bring data alive in a rugby club that's an archetypal ex-amateur organisation, or a governing body, or even a federation like the ECB, is you ask a lot of questions, you synthesise it and share no more than 4 numbers in the first session that you have, and you hold their hand gently to the extent that you're actually facilitating a cultural change that happens to be about data, as opposed to coming in and selling a service with a big deck of numbers that proves how clever you are. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, it reminds me, it's getting easier.
Yeah.
Yes, sport is sort of, I think sport and weirdly luxury goods are the 2 sectors that are coming to this, not quite last, but like really late, you know, in terms of adapting. And maybe it's because they weren't in crisis, because they've got plenty of passion and devotion and people who are happy to spend loads of money on their product. And maybe it's only now that they're getting to the point where globalization requires them to, you know, accelerate more or something. I don't know, but I mean, I was hitting my head against this particular brick wall in the BBC in 1995, you know, working on the Today programme and trying to get John Humphreys and Jim Nocty to give me their stuff so that I could put it on their first website. Right? And the BBC now held up as, you know, the paragon of virtue when it comes to being digital and everything else. The BBC went through years of this stuff. We did probably 10 years worth of culture change to get people to a point where they accepted that it was normal to communicate over the internet and to be using websites and using data and using all that stuff as a standard part of operating procedure. You know, and just because they did it first, I mean, you know, you look at the music industry. I'm so sort of annoyed by the short memories of people when people from the music industry stand up and talk about all the amazing stuff they've done with digital, and you kind of go, yeah, but you spent 10 years fucking it up. Because they spent all that time screwing up the models and trying to change DRM and all that sort of, and they went through the same culture change thing. So the good news, I guess, from a sports point of view, is that I think there's two things. One is because there are so many more examples, right? There's so much more of an acceptance that this is important and powerful and social media is there or whatever it is. That's one good thing. The other thing is that I have generally found that people in sport, managers in sport, are better to work with. You know where you are with them quicker, right? They're either on the side of the fence that they're not up for it and they're not interested, CEO is not a believer, fine, great. And he'll tell you pretty quickly, that's good. Or, and maybe it comes from a sports psyche that's about understanding the nature of you do this, you train, you win, you lose, right? Maybe, I don't know what it is in the psyche, but there is something about the chief execs inside sport is that when they do get it, boy, do you get accelerated towards the target. They have a real sense of, right, so you need to do this and this and this, and then we'll win. Great, let's get on with it. That's powerful.
In answer to kind of direct question, I think there's an irony here, because sports federations in particular and the sports clubs are exceptional on what I would call the sports performance side of their business. I mean, really are understanding themselves, how do people run, what they're there. And please don't, I really mean this, please don't tweet this, I met Peter Kenyon 3 weeks ago, who was chief executive of two of the most successful clubs in the Premier League, Chelsea and Man United over his time. He's now running a player fund, you know, as in it's it's hugely successful, and in terms of investing in players that are then sold on, gives clubs liquidity. That's almost a byproduct. How does he make purchasing decisions on a player in Bulgaria that he's never likely to have seen? And actually data plays a huge part in that, because it just mitigates a load of the risk. And player trading, is going to be still in most sports is going to be way more than any sponsorship deal. In reality, selling Gareth Bale, which I'm sure will happen, will be £80 million. Spurs are likely to do their shirt deal next year at £15 million. Come on. So they actually use data on the performance side extremely well. Actually, church and state need to come together a little bit more, and actually that'll become hugely powerful. One thing I would say, after kind of four guys, been talking about social media, the linear TV model is still alive and kicking, right? Appointment of view of a great sporting product will make people sit down in one place, and the whole concept of time shift will be less there. So let's not say that's completely dead. It's still absolutely
live sporting events,
live sporting,
best drama.
It's still there. So I don't want to go too far the other way. So
I mean, to that point, the fantastic Olympic sport we saw last summer, right? We can all remember 4 or 5 things that we saw live that coalesced as with mates or whatever in a completely different level. And yet the most watched video online on BBC Sport at the Olympics was the German guy screwing the dive up. Different things. Right? We just got to keep that in mind.
All right. Well, I think we've come to the end of a great evening. What I'd like to do is, I've been at business schools for over 20 years, and one thing I love about business schools is the students and what they can do. And this event was student organized, student run. It's been a privilege for me to be here. So thank you so much. It was an absolutely fantastic evening. I think we have a reception following. Harriet, do you have a word to say then? So thank you to the students and the panel as well. Thank you.
So with that said, I'm going to be very quick. We have drinks and food that await us. I'd like to just say a couple brief words. What started off as an ideation for a sports business conference 6 months ago became a reality this evening, and that was in no small part due to the folks over at Ayers and all the support that they provided us in organizing this event tonight, so thank you very much. I'd also like to thank Professor Voss and Professor Tavassoli for 2 amazing panels this evening. And third, our co-chairs, Harriet and Richard, did a phenomenal job over the last 6 months in terms of guiding us through uncharted waters, so thank you very much.
And lastly, I'd like to give a very warm thank you to our speakers and the organizations they represent in terms of supporting us with our ambition of creating a conference revolving around the business of sport, and really their buy-in in terms of what we're trying to do as a club. So thank you very much.